Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from. Welcome to the first 100 days, Turning New Hires into Keepers, the second in the series of webinars put on by the Society of Satellite Professionals International, exploring the key issues in talent management in our business. My name is Robert Bell. I'm Executive Director of the Society. And I've been so for quite a few years. It's my great pleasure to host today's webinar and to bring you some extremely talented and experienced individuals to show you things that may be familiar to you, but to bring them to you in much greater detail and richness than probably you're able to encounter in your daily life. Just a couple of minutes before we start about the Society, in case you're not familiar with us. SSPI has been around since 1985 when we were founded in a bar, something I'm very proud of. We've come a long way since those days, and we're on a mission to make the satellite industry one of the best in the world at attracting and engaging the talent that powers innovation. This industry right now is going through a period of remarkable and very exciting change. And some tremendous opportunities opening up for us, as well as tremendous change in established business models. And during that period, this industry needs talent to make that innovation possible as it never has before. SSPI is a network of about 4,000 members and some 50 sponsoring organizations in more than 40 nations around the world. We have regional chapters and affiliates in the US, Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia. And we're known for something we've been doing since the very beginning, which is basically networking. You know, a big network like this has high value, and we bring that value to our members by online, of course, but also through a set of educational and networking events that happen throughout the year. We also, and perhaps this is at the heart of our mission, we operate 4 unique programs that deliver on that mission of attracting the talent that powers innovation. The first one is the Next Generation program campaign, which focuses, of course, on students and both graduate and undergraduate students who, believe it or not, even though they may be building CubeSats in their classes, really don't know our industry exists and therefore can't really target a career in it. And so we do a lot of awareness raising and engagement with student organizations to change that dynamic so that they know that there's other places to work beside their national space organization or a university. Our Better Satellite World campaign aims to really do that awareness raising for young people, but also for future customers, the customers we're going to have in 10 years who probably know nothing about us today, as well as government policymakers. And it's a set of stories of dramatizing the incredible impact that satellite has on the modern world. I like to say that we actually run the world, though hardly anybody is aware of it. And the fact that they're not aware of it is a strategic challenge that we're setting out to change. Our Leaders Quest focuses on identifying and also educating everyone in the industry about the key leaders in our business, whether they are established leaders like Dave Thompson at Orbital ATK in that picture, or the people you've never heard of because they're under the age of 35 but are already beginning to transform how parts of this business run. So we do a lot of that sort of recognition. We think it's a key part of what we do. And finally, the new century workforce, and that's what we're engaged in here today. This is where we turn to the industry itself, whether it is to our human resources and talent managers in the business, or anybody who has to manage people coming to them for help, for guidance, for mentorship, and knowing what to do and how to shape the career of the people who are going to ultimately inherit this industry and make it continue to advance. So what we're doing here is a small part of that mission, and it's about time we got to it. Some housekeeping rules. All attendees will be in listen-only mode during this webinar, but we certainly want to hear from you. So you will find on the control panel for this a section called Questions, and I hope that you will feel free to jot some questions down there. I will, as moderator, take hold of those, and when we get to the Q&A session, I'll make sure to get your comments and questions into the discussion. We are recording this, and the recording will be available to all attendees after the webinar, as well as the presentation itself. And hopefully, we have not yet had any technical support problems, but if you have them, there are a couple of numbers on your screen that you might want to jot down in case you get knocked off for any reason and are having trouble getting back in. So our agenda, we've already completed the introduction to the Society, and I appreciate your giving me that time to do it. Next, we're going to be hearing a presentation about our title topic, the first 100 days, which of course is all about what's known in the human resources business as onboarding. Following that, we're going to have and that's going to come to us from a very interesting gentleman who works closely with the human resources organizations within aerospace, space, and satellite. And then we're going to have a dialogue with somebody who actually is a practitioner in the business, has to carry out some heavy responsibilities every day to get his perspective, and we'll follow that with some question and answer based upon what you had to say. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce the first of our speakers. He is Doug Maxfield. He's a senior partner at the very well-known company Korn Ferry, which of course people think of mostly as an executive recruitment firm, but it also has a very large practice in trying to help companies manage their workforces for greatest results. So Doug, I hope you've been unmuted, and I'm happy to turn the presentation over to you.
I have been. Thank you very much, Robert. And it is a great pleasure to be with you all this morning, wherever you are in the world. And I've been looking forward to speaking with you about this. As Robert mentioned, I'm Doug Maxfield, the senior partner with Korn Ferry based out of San Francisco. I've been with the firm for almost 14 years now, and we focus a lot on executive recruiting, organization design, leadership development, and other talent issues such as compensation. So as such, onboarding is a huge, important thing for us because it makes such a big difference in the retention and performance of your employees. So I'm going to spend some time talking about what is onboarding and the way that we think about it. Especially, we're going to be focusing on the aspects of onboarding that are most in your control. So we'll talk a little bit about process, but especially we're going to talk about what do you do as a leader, what do you do as a manager in order to be as effective in onboarding new talent as possible. So as we do that, let's talk first about why onboarding is so important. The reality is that first impressions after that hiring decision and after that job acceptance has been made, the first impressions are incredibly important. And a lot of important decisions happen in the first several days of employment. In fact, sometimes they happen even before you start your job. The statistics show that approximately 4% of employees leave the job after day one, and that 22% of staff turnover occurs in the first 45 days. Now, of course, not all of this is attributable to onboarding. The interview process is obviously really critical to this process, but we know from experience and from research that onboarding has a big impact in your ability to retain your employees after they've been hired. Now, these statistics are not much better for executives. 28% of senior leaders decide if they are going to stay or leave their job in the first week. But we see that a structured onboarding program has a very large impact on their decisions to stay with the organization for over 3 years. A little bit more here about the turnover of externally hired executives in the first 18 months. It ranges between 25% and 35%. Now, on this page, I think the most important part is the data at the very bottom of your screen. It is very difficult for a new employee, manager, leader to succeed on their own. So much of their success depends on the strength of their relationships and their ability to build new networks in the organization. And you will see that themed throughout this entire presentation about what we're trying to do in the onboarding process. Our experience also has been, as we're talking about the new workforce, our experience has been that when diversity is also a factor, for example, a minority comes into a majority environment, whether it's a female coming into a heavily male environment or an ethnic minority into a predominantly Caucasian environment, the onboarding process is even more critical. And why is that? Well, it's exactly this last bullet point, because it's incredibly difficult for a new hire to stand on their own and be successful without a network, social integration in order to support them. And that, as a manager, is what your role is. So let's get to the basics really quickly here. Simple definition of onboarding, and this is my own definition, is the process of integrating a new employee and enabling their success in the workplace environment. So let's break that down a little bit. First of all, it is a process. Onboarding is not a single event, but it should be viewed as a process. And that process should last at least the first 100 days, and in some cases, it lasts much longer than that. New employee. So who is onboarding for? It's important for all new employees, whether for the recent grad or the new CEO. Onboarding is a process that everyone needs to go through, although goals are different as you go through that process. Integrating into the workplace environment. This speaks to the need to make connections within the context of their job and the organization's processes, cultures, expectations, connections with others, including and perhaps especially with the manager. And finally, the idea about enabling success. And this is really what onboarding is all about, helping them be successful in their job. What is expected out of them? How are they expected to work? How are they expected to communicate? How are they expected to resolve problems? What are the expected results? What are the skills, knowledge, behaviors, relationships, tools, technologies in order to achieve that success? And all of those things may need to be part of the onboarding process. Okay, so let's talk, how do you measure onboarding? How do you measure the success of onboarding? And really, we can make it very simple. Number one is time to productivity. How long does it take them to become effective in the role that they were hired to do? And the second, I view this as kind of a backup, but a easier to measure thing, is the level of engagement and retention of the new employee. Sometimes we also measure time to promotion. Now, this is a little bit longer timeline, but it's a good indication that they are performing at or above expectations. Now, I've had it asked of me several times before about good turnover versus bad turnover. The statement that, yeah, there's some expected, and so isn't some turnover okay? We want those that don't have the skills that they need to leave the organization fairly quickly. And I think the answer is yes. However, let's be clear about that. Turnover within the first several months especially, and several years of employment, indicates both an onboarding problem and possibly an interviewing problem, a hiring problem. If we are doing a good job in hiring those that we expect have the skills, the fit and the behaviors, et cetera, in order to be successful in our organization, we want them to stay. We want them to stay and to perform at their best level possible. All right. So, given that we are onboarding a variety of different people, onboarding must be focused on helping the new employee contribute in the way they are expected to contribute, no matter the level. One of the things that we like to use in the onboarding process and thinking about the onboarding process is a model called the 4 stages of contribution that was developed by Gene Dalton and Paul Thompson, who were at Harvard for a while and then at Brigham Young University. This model describes the expected contribution from different roles throughout a career and within your organization. And I'd like to describe this model and each one of its stages just really briefly to to help illustrate why this is so important. But I'm going to start with stage 2. So what is stage 2? Stage 2 is the type of role that you are hiring somebody in to be a subject matter expert. So somebody is establishing their distinct competence, they're an individual contributor, they're a specialist. We expect them to be independent in their role, and what they contribute is largely coming from their hands, their own mind, their own ability to get things done. Stage 3 is a different type of a role. This is somebody who has the primary responsibility to guide and to develop others, to interface throughout the organization. They're serving as a coach or a mentor or perhaps a formal manager or a project leader. And this person primarily has responsibility for others. They may be responsible for some of their own individual contribution, but they also have this responsibility to multiply the capability and performance of other people. Stage 4 is all about shaping the organization's direction. So this could be an executive coming in, or somebody who's a senior leader, or somebody who's expected to be highly influential in the organization, to innovate, to sponsor other people, to create paths. And they have a responsibility for the organization. So as you're hiring people and bringing them on, each one of them is targeted for one of these stages, whether a subject matter expert, somebody who has responsibility for others, or for strategic contribution. And your onboarding process should be targeted on getting them to the stage of performance where they are expected to contribute. So for example, if you are hiring somebody to go into stage 2, you want to make sure that they have the job skills they need, that they've developed a strong relationship with the manager, that they have a relationship with their peers, that they know where to go for help, and that they understand the expectations of the organization. Stage 3 may have similar things, but they need to know very well who is their team, what's the context in which they're performing, what are the expectations about how I get things done and influence people in the organization? How do I operate within this culture, and who are the influential people that will help me do that? Stage 4 is perhaps even more critical, and we see failures at stage 4 on a fairly regular basis in transitioning into this, as people perhaps try to make this process happen too quickly. A stage 4 person really needs to know who are the influencers, what is the culture of the organization, and how can I direct in a way in this organization that will be well received by the people. What's the history of the organization, okay? So as you are transitioning people in, as you're going through that onboarding process, you need to be thinking about how is it that they are expected to contribute, and therefore, what is it they need? Now, so you may ask the question, what is stage 1? Well, frankly, stage 1 is that onboarding stage. And it's a stage through which all of your performers, all of your new hires need to transition. Some of them are transitioning into that perhaps at the beginning of their career for 6 to 12 to 18 months. Others, like a new senior leader in the organization, may only transition for the first 90 days, but all new hires need to go through that transition because they are dependent on others. And one of their primary roles is that they are learning. In particular, they are learning how things get done around here. And frankly, the research shows that if you shortcut this process, it can shortcut their ability to perform later on in their job. So target, what are the things that they need to know, understand, perform at in order to be effective in the target role, and then allow them to go through that process and enable that process. So what I'm saying is that orientation is not enough. Many organizations, and I'm sure Scott will be speaking more about that, many organizations have new employee orientation. But this typically is nothing much beyond the introduction to the company history, values, and culture. It's completion of forms, and it usually lasts maybe one day, maybe 1 week. And there's a lack of clear ownership in the actual onboarding process. Formalized onboarding, which most, hopefully most organizations do, tends to be little more than the completion of forms. It involves the manager and also will frequently involve a 30, 60-day performance review. For some organizations, this can take up to 6 months, and it bridges that gap between recruiting and hiring. One of the challenges is that there is also this gap between who really owns this process, and a manager ends up oftentimes being responsible for the process by themselves, which makes it sometimes a little bit more difficult. Strategic onboarding tends to be that there is a consistent approach throughout the organization, or at least a consistent structure for it. There's a plan for socialization. There are programs that are tailored for specific job functions. There are employee-specific, customized task lists, team building. Remember that socialization process, that need to connect with other people, and mentor programs, and it can last beyond 6 months. The hiring manager needs to be actively involved, and you may also rely on mentors for this as well. The reality is that the hiring manager most frequently provides the best personalization during the onboarding process. They are expected, and you as managers will find the greatest success when you ensure that over those first 90 days, you are spending enough time in two-way dialogue with that new employee, as well as making connections for them so that they can understand with great clarity what is their role, what are the expectations for them about their performance, how they communicate, how they resolve problems, and anything else that is expected out of them in order to be successful. Social integration. They need to understand who will enable their success, who are their go-to people, developing relationships with people. How do I work with them? Who is going to impact my success, either positively or negatively? And part of the social integration, part of the key part of that, again, is with the manager themselves. You've got to develop a close relationship with them, so there's this two-way communication. They also need to understand the culture. How do I get things done around here? In particular, what are the unwritten rules? What are things that you will never see hung up on the wall and that most people will never tell you until you make a mistake? Let's talk about those things ahead of time. Should be one of the things that you focus on. Make sure that it's a two-way conversation, that you're meeting with them regularly throughout that first 90 days and beyond to make sure they integrate. Now, as I close out here and we turn it over to Scott, I want to place some emphasis as the industry is changing and we're hiring different people. And what we have found, as I mentioned up front, is that the onboarding process is even more important for what we would call diverse new hires, or people who are different from the norm of your organization today. And this is specifically because the onboarding process and the things that you need to learn are full of a lot of subtleties. And so it's a lot easier for people who are in the majority group to learn those subtleties. They fall into a natural social group. It's easier for the majority of the organization to communicate with them. Now, I suppose this could be intentional at times, but that's not our experience most of the time. It's much more frequently unintentional, that it's just that much more difficult to communicate with somebody who's different in age and ethnicity and gender, communication style. And as a result, it becomes even more important that hiring managers purposely spend time regularly up front with that new hire including sharing information about yourself and genuinely showing that you want to learn about them, developing familiarity with them, comfort and trust, clarifying preferences, being explicit about the way that things get done around there, also identifying any headwinds that they may face in the organization and what to do about them. Don't pretend like those things don't exist. You probably all saw the movie Hidden Figures, and although some of that may have been fictional, some of that still exists in our organization today. You also need to make sure that you enable feedback. We will often do this with organizations as actually a facilitated one-on-one process between the manager and the new employee, and it has remarkable results. So I encourage you strongly to really think about those new hires that you're making and go through this process, especially if they're different than the norm, to really connect with them. So let me turn it back over to you, Robert, and we can transition over to Scott.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doug. That was extremely interesting. Quite a few questions came in, which we will be turning back to you as well as Scott for. But before we do that, we're going to have ourselves a bit of a conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Draw, who's the Vice President for Human Resources at Boeing's unit focusing on defense, space, and security. And of course, our industry fits in there as well. So, Scott, are you with us?
Robert, I am. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time on this. I know that people in your line of work get pulled in a lot of directions every minute, so appreciate the time. So I've got some questions for you, and some others may come up as we go along. Doug just did, I think, a really nice job of orienting us to what this onboarding process is and why it's important. You have to juggle a lot of priorities in terms of the workforce there at Boeing BDS. How much weight are you able to give to this particular function, this onboarding? How important do you think it really is, and how does that translate in the priorities?
Well, I use the analogy. It is, first impressions are lasting impressions, and you don't get a chance to make a first impression twice. And so, how we show up as a company and as an aerospace satellite industry for people coming into this field, it's of paramount importance. And I would certainly agree with Doug in terms of 100 days is a starting point. Probably is longer. I kind of think in terms of really that first year is an important cycle. Obviously the first 100 days is very, very critical as you make the connections. But it's really once a person fully gets ingrained, do they understand? Because at that point, people are asking themselves a question: is this what I signed up for? Is this the people I want to be with, and those sort of things? So I think it's very critically important for us to make sure we get it right on day one and day 100.
Yeah, and by the way, we have to blame Franklin Roosevelt for that whole 100-day thing. But anyway, I agree with you. So at your organization, what are the, again, Doug sketched some stuff for us. What are the essential elements of an onboarding process there at BDS?
Yeah. Robert, one of the things that we try to do is look at it not as just a day or two, because we certainly have some of that as part of our process. I like the analogy of inviting someone over to your home for dinner, right? Where, when we have somebody that comes over to our house for dinner, we want to be prepared, right? We want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel included. And we want them to know that, this is a special time because it really is. And for people who've been around the industry or been with companies like me, this is my 28th year with the Boeing company, we sometimes, don't have that fresh perspective on the organization. So anytime we bring a new hire into the organization, it's a great opportunity to get a fresh view and feedback for us of what's going well and maybe some of the things that we can do better. But using kind of that analogy of inviting people over is a key part, because one of the things we want to do is connect people. Connect people first and foremost with their leader, right? Recently there was a book, a few years ago, Love 'Em or Lose 'Em. And one of the key feedbacks from that book is people don't necessarily leave companies, they leave managers, because that relationship is so critically important. So making sure that there's a real good connection between the leader and that employee first and foremost. Secondly, drawing on some of the things that Doug talked about is making the connection with the team, the peers. Do I fit in here? Do I see myself with others? And in particular, if they're part of that non-majority that he talked about. So, do we have a female that sees other females in the work group, in leadership? And so one of the things that we do here is have, like many companies, have affinity groups or business resource groups where people can connect with others to say, ask those intangibles. How does a person get ahead? How does a person like me get ahead to aspire to a leadership role? So making sure that there's those connections is really important to the peers. I'd also say the connection to the company's mission values, and where we're going, and not just the company's mission, in my particular case, Boeing, but what is it for that we can tie those employees to our customer's mission, right? So for us, I get pretty excited about that, and I think our people that we recruit in this space get pretty excited as well. For example, many times we'll talk about some of our programs, the SLS program, the Space Launch Systems, in its heavy configuration, 384 feet, that's going to take the humans to Mars, right? I mean, how cool is that? Just recently, this past week, we landed the X-37B after over 700 days in space. So making sure that employees come in and say, you can do a variety of things that impact our world, be it X-37 or SLS, or building satellites that's going to help protect and connect the world, is something that we really like to do. And then finally, it's connecting them with the leadership team at large, the senior leaders of the company. And that's particularly important because people will be asking themselves the question, how big is that walk-talk gap? I see the signs on the wall, I see the logos, I see the advertisement, but is there truth in advertisement? Are these people walking the talk, and is this a place that I really feel proud of, that I want to go tell my neighbors to go be? And so Doug's point about inclusion is so important. We think that that is probably one of the most important things we can do, is when we bring new employees in, get them connected to their boss, to their peers, to the company's mission at large, so that they feel welcome, that they go out into the communities and tell others what a great place it is they work. And whether it's church or synagogue or mosque or no matter where people spend their time with others, having people feel welcome and going out and telling others what a great place it is really what we're after in terms of an objective.
It's a nice way to encapsulate it. You want to get good press from your employee. I really like those two, particularly those last 2 points you made. Mission drives everything. If we get that right, and particularly customers' mission, how specifically do you do that in some of the early conversations? Do you try to get people in front of customers? Do you try to get, and obviously you connect, you get them one-on-one with some of your senior leaders. I think it's another valuable point. But can you just talk a little bit about that mission side? How do you inculcate that?
Yeah, one of the things that we're proud of, because it's a key part of our heritage, and if it wasn't for Bill Boeing, a first-generation immigrant, meeting a veteran, we wouldn't have a company. So let me use the veterans and veteran family members as kind of the analogy to pull on, because that is one of our largest customer base. So we're proud to say that we employ about 15% of our workforce are veterans, and so about 21,000 veterans that we have. And so it's taking people that already understand some of the things that they've learned in the Army, the Air Force, or the Navy or the Coast Guard, and bringing that into the company and sharing with others kind of what we're doing. So you kind of have a head start with that audience, and it's a good audience for us. But it's also using those folks to share with others in the company about, hey, here's what an AH-64 Apache gunship can do on the battlefield, and here's how it is, an arm of democracy, or here's how a C-17 delivers, humanitarian goods to people that are in crisis after natural disasters. Getting people tied in there. So veterans are a key part of that community for us, but it's not just veterans, but that's probably the first one that comes to mind when I think about tying in a particular audience into our mission.
Yeah, that's good, and that's funny. That's exactly what we're trying to do at SSPI with our Better Satellite World mission, is to let people know, let people know that this stuff matters deeply. Does that onboarding experience vary significantly depending upon the job description? And obviously, you've got a lot of different parts of your company, as well as, of course, many different job categories. Or does it tend to follow a similar pattern?
Yeah, Robert, it follows a similar pattern, but there are differences, and the differences is really kind of at the leadership level. When you bring someone into a manager, an executive level, and the reason why it's different, I mean, they would go through the same kind of basic experience, but there is one thing that's different, and that's when we allow somebody to lead other employees. We think that's a special event. And so we have a leadership center here in St. Louis that's what I call kind of infusion of the DNA of the company into our leaders, so that they fully live our values and they understand what we're doing and what we expect of them, of how they are to lead people. And so, the key difference here is we focused a lot of our leadership programs at transition times. A new leader coming into the company, we strongly encourage them, go to the leadership center, go spend a week there or more time there, so that you get a good, robust experience with 200 or 300 other of your colleagues who have some been with the company a little bit, some been with the company a long time, but it gives them kind of a jump start of what we're looking for in leaders. So a very basic common core for every employee, and for managers and executives, they would get probably around at the Leadership Center. And of course, there's so many things going on, at that first 90 days. We try to get them to go there, because it's not your schedule's not going to get any lighter. Go spend and invest the time in that first 100 days to get ingrained in the culture of our company.
Yeah, you're right about that. It's not going to get any lighter later on. Doug raised an interesting thing in his presentation about the fact that you've got the ownership of this onboarding process, however long it lasts, between the human resources team that has to structure it and make sure it's accomplishing its goals, and the individual hiring manager and team. So I guess two questions for you that are related. One is, what's the kind of balance you guys try to strike there in that? And then secondly, how do you instruct your managers to deal with their new hires so that they can be effective in that role?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me start out by saying, hey, we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We have our challenges in many ways. But what we try to do is the balance that we try to find, Robert, is we have for the more structured portions of the program, and we try not to create a bureaucracy to doing this thing, is led by HR and our shared services group, who is a key part of the hiring and staffing process. Because, to me, this whole onboarding concept begins, it begins when you start having a dialogue with potential employees. And so our global staffing team is a key part of that, and then they hand off to some of the folks in HR, be it our learning, training, and development that Norma Clayton was leading for us in the past, and then it's quickly ingraining that management that I talked about earlier, and of course, back to love them or leave them. That's the most critical point. So making sure that those managers, and they know that any of our managers, because they've been through the Leadership Center, understand the importance of talent and how critical it is to accomplishing the tasks that we do. Because nothing happens with all the automation in the world. Nothing's going to happen if you don't have the human capital that you need to prosecute your business.
Right. No, thank you. That's okay. So, but you sketched that out in the big. You've got a nice kind of conveyor that gets people to the point where they're going to make that connection with the manager, hopefully and make that connection with the mission and so forth. Thank you. That's a really good answer. I've got some other questions but I also want to actually bring Doug in to get some of his views on this. But before we do that, this is the bottom line question, right? What's based on the lessons of your career, what's the single most important thing you think to get right when you're bringing on a new person on board?
Clearly inclusion, making people feel welcome, making people feel part of the team, making people feel this is not Scott Draw's company, this is not somebody else's company, this is my company, right? And the quicker that we can have those folks feeling that ownership, talking in the community about what amazing products we build, what amazing mission that we have that impacts the world, and what an amazing group of colleagues that they work with, that's the measure of success, and it all gets down to how do you make people feel included.
Yeah, boy, I think it's very powerful. It's absolutely correct. We've all I've had some experience of all of the above, and boy, that's what makes the difference. Doug, are you with us? I believe you are, according to my control panel.
I am here.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got a number of questions that have come in on my panel, but before that, I want to ask my own question because I'm the moderator. And it's one of the things we did a workforce study a couple years ago, and we're going to be doing another one this year. And one of the things that really leaped out from it was that there are leading companies in our business, and Boeing is certainly one of them. They've got a very structured process. They've given a lot of thought to it. They've got research to back it up. They really work the problem. But unfortunately, they are the minority in our business. And for most, Doug, your portrait of the typical orientation, just about does it. And I think that's really, I think that's a false economy. But the question I want to ask of both you gentlemen is, how expensive is this? Or if you decide that you really just can't afford to spend a lot of money in it because you're a small to mid-sized company, you're not a Boeing, what are the key things you can do that don't necessarily involve a lot of money? How much of this is throwing money at the problem, and how much of this is just thinking it through the right way? And Scott, maybe you'd weigh in on that first.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's for someone who doesn't have the resources like a company like ours. I would say pause to see how much it costs you, the cost of turnover. The cost of turnover of getting someone up to being 100% fully productive. What does it take to get them all the way up that learning curve? And then losing someone and off of that. The numbers range and they vary, but typically up to 1 year's annual salary is what some of the projections are. So you can quickly go, if that's what it's going to cost me, boy, I probably could afford to invest some time in making sure that I'm as good as possible. Because I think there's this theoretical piece where that you really will lose people. And for us, we subscribe to a consortium called the Aerospace Retention Consortium, ARC. And so we compare ourselves because we were losing people and we were wondering, well, is that good thing? Is that bad? Doug talked about good turnover, bad turnover, and we certainly want people that are connected to our mission, vision, and values. But in comparison to what? In comparison to the rest of the industry, and for us, comparison to the aerospace, our aerospace peers is what we compare to. So I would say take a look at the business case of what this could be a very small investment that could have a huge payoff for you.
Interesting. Doug?
Yeah, I completely agree with Scott. First of all, we've got the opportunity cost here. The replacement costs are incredibly higher, especially the more senior you get in the organization or the more job training that is required. So that is a very expensive thing, and investing a little bit up front will help you resolve at least part of those challenges. Also, I think I would say that it's important to not overlook the things that don't necessarily have to cost a whole lot, and that is that role that both Scott and I have talked about that the manager has with their employee directly, or that a mentor has directly with the employee. even doing things like having a hiring manager, depending on the size of the team, obviously, having the hiring manager schedule some time once a week for the first several months to sit down and just ask questions of the employee and let them ask questions back. That will have a large impact, and it won't, necessarily cost a whole lot of money to do that. Should be really part of the operating rhythm of most managers anyway. So I'd say yes, invest money in order to save money, and look for the things that you can do that really don't cost any money at all.
Right. I mean, one of the top of the list would have to be instructing your managers in how to do this, how to bring somebody on board.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Such a simple thing, right? But again, our interviews made it seem as though it's sort of like, here, go meet your manager. Good luck. He'll show you where the lunchroom is. Next.
That's right. Or even worse, when the employee shows up on the first day and there is no manager, or they're walking out the door on a business trip for several weeks. That's a hard transition.
Right. One of the questions came in here was about, you gentlemen both emphasized the incredible value of that managerial relationship and that relationship with the peers. How much of this is, if you will, the soft stuff of going out for a beer together, and how much of it is the sort of harder content of the mission, the job, the responsibilities? I mean, when an effective hiring manager in your experience, how do they strike that balance?
I'll start, Doug. I think, Robert, I'm not sure it's always the taking out for beer. There's some combination of that balance of independence. You need somebody who will, bring you into the team, share with you, here's what success looks like, preps you for feedback of, here's how we'll give you feedback. Here's how you're going to know that you're doing well. Because, we start with an assumption that every employee comes to work every single day wanting to do the very best job possible for our company and for our customers. And so, starting with that as a premise, it's also helping people, back to the low cost kind of scenario, is here's what you're doing really well, and here's some of the things you may want to consider as you think about executing your job. That feedback loop to those employees is really, really helpful. At times it may be a barbecue at a backyard, or taking someone out for a beer and sharing with them, hey, you might want to reconsider these sort of things. Yeah, there's a place for that, but I think it's more of that feedback, and it has to come from this authentic place that people know that your intent is pure. That it's pure in wanting to really help that employee fit into the team and be successful at the company long term.
Yeah, I think. Well, Scott, you said this several times over the course of our time together here, but I just really appreciate it. Yeah, people read right through others, and if they know what the real intention is, and if it's the right intention, it makes a huge difference. Doug, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that division between what is kind of the hard stuff and what's the soft skill stuff, it really depends on what is expected out of that role. Going back to that idea of the 4 stages of contribution, and the specific job role, how much technical skill do they need in order to be successful, and how much does the organization have responsibility to give them those skills? So obviously, in many roles, that could be important, especially in this industry. But again, as Scott's emphasizing, that relationship with the manager, those soft skills, that allowing people to ask questions and to feel comfortable in the environment is absolutely critical. And let me just point out, and this was just used as a metaphor, but something for us to think about. Remember that even that conversation is an inclusion event, and thinking about the way that you have that conversation is going to have an impact on them. For some, going out for a beer isn't going to work, especially for somebody that needs to head out early from work and get home to take care of children, or there's an issue with alcohol, or whatever the case may be. I don't want to overemphasize that point, but being very clear that you are onboarding an individual and you're giving them an opportunity to ask questions and to connect, and that you're asking questions about their background and sharing enough that they feel comfortable doing the same.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Another question from the group, which I thought was interesting. So you're in your onboarding process, and you discover that you've got a difficult employee, one of those difficult employees, nonetheless very talented, very a lot to contribute, very valuable, but a couple of issues you got to hopefully rough spots hopefully get filed off. How do you advise your hiring managers, your line managers, on that? And I don't know if you do, but it's certainly something that we all run into. Maybe
I'll be happy to take that one. That's happened a time or two over my career. We talk sometimes about crucial conversations, and we've hired lots of people over the past 5 to 10 years, and we'll hire 20 or 30,000, and we won't always get it right. So I think it's having the courage to have the conversation with a person to say, I'm noticing some things that cause me to pause to think, is this something you're comfortable adjusting, or is this part of who you are as a core person and how you choose to operate? Because I understand that there's going to be a rub here, and should you continue to operate that way, this is probably not the right environment for you. And let's figure out a way for a graceful exit. I think having that conversation in a healthy, transparent, forthright way can turn a person around, or can clarify. Because the worst thing I think you can do is just let that person linger there. Because boy, problems don't get better with time. And moving a problem around is not really helpful at all. So addressing that early and having the manager and leader have the courage to go have a direct conversation, but also do it in a way where allow that person to say, boy, no, this is how I operate. Okay, well, that's great. Back to the diversity and inclusion piece, we need to have a broad swath of way people solve problems and think about things. That's one of the beauties of what we have in aerospace, of how we've gotten the innovation that we have in many ways. But in those situations where how they interact with other people or treat other people are times when you need to have those crucial conversations.
I couldn't agree more with Scott. I think that's right on, and would add, in fact, that when we are doing hiring and onboarding of especially new executives, where we have done some kind of an assessment ahead of time, we will specifically look for things where they differ in their personality profile from the norm of the organization, and we'll give them coaching up front about that to make sure that they are very aware of their own behavior, how they're showing up in the organization, so that they can fit in well and use their own style, but not clash so much with the culture of the organization that they will not succeed. So again, emphasizing what Scott said, have that conversation early and have it often, not to beat them over the head about it, but to make sure that they understand the challenges that they're perhaps creating for themselves.
Interesting, yeah. Last question I'll squeeze in here. Don't have a whole lot more time, but I just thought it was an interesting one. Your statistic, Doug, about the 22% of new hires who leave in 45 days, 28% of executives who decide the first week whether or not this is for them or not. For both of you, and I'm sure your companies have looked into this, what are the factors that make people decide in that first 45 days? What are the primary ones that make people decide in that first 45 days that they're not going to stick it out? And to what extent can the company kind of attack some of those things? And Doug, since you raised it, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, great question. Of course, there's a broad range of things, but a few things that we can specifically point to. One is going to be the relationship with the manager, whether or not they feel like they're going to be able to work with that individual and with the team that they're assigned to. The other thing is the culture of the organization overall. Getting in and feeling like, do I connect with this culture or do I not? Do I connect with the larger purpose of what this organization and the culture is all about? I think
sorry, if I can just interrupt you, Doug. So really that just goes back to, and it may be that there isn't a fit. It may be that the fit with the manager isn't going to be there, the fit with the company isn't going to be there. But if we at the company level haven't gone to the trouble of, creating the opportunity for a good fit with the manager and exposing that new employee to what makes this company unique and different and gives it a powerful mission, if we miss that opportunity, we're sort of raising the odds that we're going to lose that person.
That's exactly right. I mean, really the question that people are asking themselves as they come into an organization is, can I be successful here? Can I be successful here? And if they feel like they have the tools that they need in order to be successful, it's easier for them to stay.
Yeah, thank you. Scott, what's your view on that?
I totally agree with what Doug shared there. I think in a few exceptions where we've had, it's a failure on us as the organization when that happens, and it's a failure because I don't think at that point we've done a very good job of clearly articulating what our organization's about, what the role's about, what success looks like for that person, and what we need for it, and the skills and competencies of that leader. And so anytime we run into that situation, I don't necessarily look at that person. I also look at us and go, boy, how did we not communicate what we're all about? Because we just wasted that person's time, energy, and impacted that individual and potentially their family, and it's caused us a setback on what we need to do.
A friend and colleague of mine once said to me, the greatest failure you can make in communicating is to assume that you have. So, listen, gentlemen,
so
thank
correct.
you. Thank you. Doug Maxfield, Senior Partner at Korn Ferry, and Scott Draw, VP of Human Resources for Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security. I found this a very, very illuminating conversation, so I thank you both very much for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Robert.
Absolutely. Let's hit the right button and see if it works. There we go. Coming up in June 20, we're going to be doing another one of these, and it's going to be about a pretty cool topic: the hiring practices of new space companies. I think it's pretty clear to everybody who's in the traditional or the incumbent side of this business. There's a lot of new entrants. They're getting a lot of glamour, a lot of rock star status, and so that has certainly increased their ability to attract talent. So what are they doing right? And what are they doing? What lessons can they teach the rest of the industry about how to attract the most innovative talent out there? So we look forward to that. It's going to be can't tell you who's going to be talking yet, but we'll be working on that actually beginning tomorrow. And so my last word to you before bidding farewell is just to urge you to join our mission. SSPI has been around a long time. We're going to be around a lot longer. We were honored to have a very large number of companies who see the value in what we do and support it, and a very large number of members who take advantage of this big global network of folks and of many events we put on. So thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to having you with us on our next webinar. Take care.